The command center of Starbase Omega pulsed with a dying heartbeat. Holographic displays flickered like fever dreams, casting sickly green light across the faces of the Galactic Confederacy's last defenders. Admiral Corell, a veteran Zarn commander whose 4 cybernetic limbs had seen 100 battles, watched the approaching Xarkon battleship consume star sectors like a mechanical nightmare. 63 minutes to total annihilation, announced the station's AI, its voice devoid of hope. The assembled alien races, Zarn, Kreltheri, Voidborn, had long since exhausted their strategies. Centuries of conflict with the Exarchon had reduced them to this, a single starbase, the last bastion of resistance, waiting for the inevitable. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos stood apart from the despairing crowd. Her human features, a mix of Brazilian and Japanese ancestry, seemed almost out of place among the alien forms. Where others saw defeat, she saw an opportunity. Her fingers danced across a modified communication console, a device she'd personally rebuilt 3 times in the last week. "We're not dead yet," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Admiral Corell turned, his multiple eyes focusing on Santos with a mixture of desperation and dismissal. "Your species has been spacefaring for less than a century. The Exarchon have technological superiority that would take millennia to overcome." Santos didn't look up from her console. "Technology isn't everything." "Sir." A junior Kreltheri communications officer interrupted, his translators working overtime. "Incoming transmission. It's from Earth." The room fell silent. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Confederacy, often viewed as primitive, unpredictable, and more trouble than they were worth. No one expected salvation from them. The transmission crackled to life. Captain Elena Rodriguez's voice cut through the static with a clarity that seemed to challenge the very concept of hopelessness. "Starbase Omega, this is Captain Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Force. We are approaching your coordinates. Prepare for fleet integration." Admiral Corell's cybernetic limbs clicked in agitation. "Integrate? With what?" "A handful of cobbled-together ships." As if in response, the first human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They looked nothing like the sleek, perfect vessels of other galactic powers. These were ships that seemed assembled from spare parts, retrofitted military hardware, and what could only be described as pure human audacity. Santos allowed herself a slight smile. "Sir," she said to Admiral Corell, "we're about to show you what humans do best." The Exarchon battleship, a massive construct of obsidian-like metal and impossible geometries, continued its approach. Its weapon systems were preparing to unleash destruction that had broken 100 civilizations. Computational models suggested the upcoming engagement would last less than 17 minutes. No one told the humans about these models. On the bridge of the lead human vessel, U.S. improviser Captain Rodriguez reviewed her team. They were a motley crew, veterans of Earth's most challenging conflicts, each bringing something unique. A former Amazon rainforest guerrilla fighter sat next to a cybersecurity expert from Seoul. An engineer who had survived 3 different war zones checked weapon systems with methodical precision. "They're going to underestimate us," Rodriguez said quietly. "And that's going to be their first mistake." The human fleet began to spread out, their movement defying every known principle of space combat. They didn't form traditional defensive lines. They didn't follow expected patterns. Instead, they moved like a living, breathing organism, unpredictable, adaptive, dangerous. The Xarkon tactical computers began to calculate, and for the first time in their millennia-long existence, they began to feel something remarkably close to confusion. The battle for Starbase Omega was about to begin, and humanity had just entered the fight. The U.S. Improviser was never meant to be a warship. Originally a research vessel cobbled together from decommissioned military hardware and experimental technology, it now represented humanity's most audacious hope. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the bridge, her posture a study in controlled tension, surrounded by a crew that defied every conventional military archetype. Lieutenant Akira Chen, the ship's communication specialist, was a living contradiction. Her fingers flew across holographic interfaces with the precision of a concert pianist and the aggression of a street fighter. To her left, Marcus Rodriguez, no relation to the captain, adjusted quantum entanglement communication arrays with the same casual expertise most people might use to adjust a thermostat. Sarkhan battle protocols are entering primary computational matrix, Chen announced, her voice a blend of clinical precision and barely contained excitement. They're running standard invasion sequence Beta 9, completely predictable. Captain Rodriguez allowed herself a tight smile. Predictability was the Exarchon's greatest weakness and humanity's ultimate weapon. The human fleet looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Where alien vessels were sleek, perfect mathematical constructs, these ships were living organisms of technological improvisation. A destroyer might have mining equipment welded to its hull. A scout ship could transform its entire power system in milliseconds. Each vessel was less a machine and more a problem-solving platform with engines. "They're scanning us," Marcus called out. Traditional threat assessment protocols. The Exarchon viewed combat like a mathematical equation. Every variable had a precise value. Every potential outcome could be calculated with machine-like certainty. What they couldn't calculate was human unpredictability. The ability to transform a weakness into strength in the span of a heartbeat. Chief Engineer Valentina Ortiz was already working her magic, monitoring systems that would have taken alien engineers weeks to understand. She was rewriting ship functionality in real time. A damaged communication array became a signal jamming device. A compromised cooling system transformed into an impromptu weapon delivery mechanism. "Captain," Ortiz's voice crackled over the communication system, "we're going to need to get creative." Creative was an understatement. The human approach to warfare was less about overwhelming force and more about intelligent adaptation. Where the Exarchon saw rigid battle formations, humans saw a dynamic chessboard where every piece could become something else at a moment's notice. The first wave of Exarchon attack drones approached, their movements a perfect geometric dance of destruction. They expected submission. They'd expected terror. Instead, they found something far more dangerous: human ingenuity. The human ships didn't just dodge, they transformed. A scout vessel suddenly projected a holographic duplicate, causing Exarchon targeting systems to fragment. Another ship used its mining laser, originally designed for asteroid resource extraction, to create localized gravitational anomalies that sent attack drones spinning into each other. "They're trying to understand our pattern," Chen observed, her voice a mixture of scientific detachment and barely contained glee. "But we don't have a pattern." That was humanity's greatest strength. No pattern meant no predictability. No predictability meant no effective counter-strategy. On the Exarchon command ship, alien commanders watched in growing confusion. Their computational models began to overheat, unable to process the chaotic human responses. Each human action defied not just military logic, but the very fundamental understanding of strategic engagement. Captain Rodriguez watched the developing battle with the calm of someone solving an intricate puzzle. "We're not here to fight like them," she muttered, more to herself than her crew. "We're here to solve the problem of their existence." The first hour of engagement would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for generations. It wasn't just a battle. It was a fundamental reimagining of warfare itself. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Warfare, for the Exarchon, had always been a precise mathematical equation. Computational models predicted outcomes with near-absolute certainty. Psychological factors were irrelevant. A weakness they never considered could be exploited. Lieutenant Akira Chen was about to prove them spectacularly wrong. Her workstation looked less like a military command interface and more like a chaotic symphony of communication technologies. Quantum entanglement communicators sat beside ancient radio frequency transmitters. Holographic displays flickered with seemingly random data streams, each one a carefully crafted psychological weapon. initiating first-stage psychological disruption. Chen announced, her fingers dancing across interfaces that would have bewildered any other species. The human communication assault began not with weapons, but with information. Carefully crafted signal patterns began broadcasting across Xarkon communication channels. These weren't simple jamming frequencies. They were intricate psychological triggers developed from centuries of human understanding of communication, propaganda, and cognitive manipulation. Historical war speeches from Earth's most complex conflicts began interweaving with mathematical sequences that subtly disrupted alien computational thinking. Fragments of heavy metal music, chaotic, unpredictable, mixed with precisely calculated cognitive dissonance algorithms. Each transmission was designed to do more than interfere with communications. They were meant to create doubt. On the Xarkon command ship, something unprecedented began to happen. Warriors bred for millennia to be perfect, unthinking soldiers started to experience an emotion they'd never known: uncertainty. The broadcasts weren't just noise. They were a multilayered psychological assault that attacked the very foundation of Xarkon military doctrine. Imagine a soldier suddenly hearing fragments of philosophical debates, mathematical paradoxes, and emotional human narratives during a critical battle. The effect was devastating. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the captain's sister and lead psychological warfare specialist, had spent years preparing for this moment. Her research, once dismissed by galactic academic circles, was now becoming humanity's most potent weapon. Psychological cohesion dropping by 17.3%, Chen reported, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and professional detachment. The Xarkon command structure, built on absolute certainty and mathematical precision, began to crack. Their warriors, genetically engineered for perfect obedience, started to ask questions. Tiny seeds of doubt began to sprout in a culture that had never experienced individual thought. Aboard the U.S. Improviser, the psychological warfare team worked with the precision of surgeons and the creativity of artists. Each transmission was a carefully crafted psychological instrument designed to exploit the tiniest vulnerabilities in the alien military mindset. Marcus Rodriguez, managing the quantum communication arrays, grinned. "They're trying to filter our transmissions," he called out. "But they can't. We're not just sending signals, we're sending ideas." And ideas, as humanity had proven throughout its turbulent history, were the most dangerous weapons of all. The Xarkon tactical computers began to smoke, literally and metaphorically. Their perfectly calibrated systems couldn't process the human approach. Where was the mathematical consistency? Where were the predictable response patterns? For the first time in their millennial history of conquest, the Xarkon were experiencing something they had never anticipated: genuine psychological warfare that attacked not just their communication systems, but their entire understanding of conflict. Lieutenant Chen allowed herself a small smile. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its technology. It had always been its ability to understand, to adapt, to challenge fundamental assumptions. The battle was far from over. But the Xarkon had already lost something far more important than territory. They had lost their certainty. Chief Engineer Valentina Ortiz moved through the U.S. Improviser's engineering deck like a conductor leading an impossible orchestra of technology. Her workspace was less a traditional engineering bay and more a living, breathing organism of technological possibility. "Cooling system to weapons conversion. Initiate," she muttered, her hands blurring across holographic interfaces. Where alien engineers saw fixed systems, Ortiz saw potential. Endless potential for radical transformation. A damaged communications array that would have been scrapped by any other species became a signal jamming device. A cargo hold's environmental controls transformed into an improvised missile guidance system. Each modification was a note in a complex technological symphony, played with the improvisation of a jazz musician and the precision of a quantum physicist. The Xarkon observed in growing horror. Their technological philosophy was rigid, built on millennia of perfect, predictable engineering. Each system had a singular purpose, designed with mathematical precision. Humans viewed technology differently, as a living, breathing ecosystem of possibility. Gravitational compensators are showing microfractures, called out Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez, Ortiz's second-in-command. Standard protocol would be immediate system shutdown. Ortiz didn't even look up. We're not doing standard protocol. Instead, she began reconfiguring the fractured gravitational compensators, routing secondary power through an auxiliary life support system. The result wasn't just a repair. It was a complete system reimagining that increased the ship's maneuverability by 37%. On the bridge, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the real-time modifications with a mixture of pride and professional curiosity. Her crew wasn't just fighting a battle. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of technological engagement. The human fleet moved like a living organism, each ship capable of instant reconfiguration. A destroyer might suddenly project holographic decoys. A scout ship could transform its entire power distribution in milliseconds. Where alien vessels were precise instruments, these were improvisational problem-solving platforms with engines. Zarkon tactical computers began to overheat, their predictive models collapsing under the weight of human unpredictability. They're trying to understand our modification patterns, Chen reported from her communication station. But we don't have patterns. That was humanity's ultimate technological weapon, pure, unadulterated adaptability. The fabric of space itself seemed to twist and shudder around Lieutenant Maria Santos' squadron. Her fleet of 6 human vessels looked like nothing more than gnats compared to the massive X-Archon Extinction Blade battleship, a construct of obsidian-like metal and impossible geometries that had broken 100 civilizations. But Santos wasn't interested in looking impressive. She was interested in winning. Tactical overlay, she commanded, her voice a calm razor's edge of concentration. The holographic displays around her bridge came alive with a complexity that would have driven alien tactical computers mad. Where other species saw a battlefield, Santos saw a living, breathing problem waiting to be solved. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Jack Miyamoto, tracked incoming weapon signatures with an almost supernatural calm. "They're charging primary disruptor cannons," he reported. Standard Sarkon protocol would suggest a full-spectrum attack pattern. Santos didn't even blink. "We're not going to be standard." The human ships moved with a fluidity that defied every known principle of space combat. They weren't dodging so much as dancing, each vessel an extension of human creativity, adapting in milliseconds to threats that would have obliterated any other fleet. A mining laser, originally designed for asteroid resource extraction, became a precision instrument of tactical genius. By creating localized gravitational anomalies, Santos' squadron sent Sarkon attack drones spinning into each other. Their perfect formations dissolved into mechanical chaos. On the Sarkon command ship, something unprecedented began to happen. Their warrior computers, engineered for millennia to be perfect, unthinking instruments of destruction, started to experience something they'd never known: genuine uncertainty. The human approach was madness. It was beautiful. It was impossible. Santos studied the battlefield like a chess grandmaster, seeing moves 10 steps ahead. A damaged communications array on one of her ships wasn't a liability. It was an opportunity. She watched as Lieutenant Chen from the main fleet began broadcasting a complex series of signal patterns that did more than jam communications. They created doubt. Fragments of human history began bleeding into Sarkon communication channels. World War II radio transmissions mixed with quantum mathematical sequences. Pieces of classical music intertwined with cognitive dissonance algorithms. Each transmission was designed to do more than interfere with communications. They were meant to attack the very foundation of alien psychological warfare. "Primary disruptor cannons charging," Miyamoto reported again, "but their targeting is oscillating." The Exarchon were discovering something terrifying. Humans didn't fight like anyone else in the galaxy. They didn't follow rules. They rewrote them. One of Santos' smallest scout ships suddenly projected multiple holographic duplicates, each moving with slightly different quantum signatures. The Exarchon targeting systems fractured, unable to determine which was the real threat. It was information warfare taken to its ultimate conclusion, not just blocking information, but flooding the enemy with so many possibilities that decision-making became impossible. "They're trying to calculate our movement patterns," Santos observed quietly. "But we don't have patterns." That was humanity's ultimate weapon: unpredictability. A massive energy blast from the Exarchon battleship approached, a weapon that had vaporized entire planetary defense networks. Any other species would have attempted to dodge. Santos' squadron did something else entirely. They moved into the blast, but not directly. Each ship used quantum entanglement communication to create microgravitational fields that bent the energy weapon around them. What should have been total destruction became a light show of impossible physics. The Exarchon warrior computers began to overheat. Their perfectly calibrated systems couldn't process what they were witnessing. Where was the mathematical consistency? Where were the predictable response patterns? "Targeting systems failing," Miyamoto reported, a hint of excitement breaking through his professional demeanor. "They're burning out their own computational matrices trying to understand us." Santos allowed herself the smallest of smiles. This wasn't just a battle. This was a fundamental challenge to the Exarchon's entire understanding of conflict. On the Exarchon command ship, something miraculous and terrifying happened. Warriors bred for absolute obedience began to ask questions. Tiny seeds of doubt sprouted in a culture that had never experienced individual thought. The Extinction Blade battleship, a marvel of alien engineering that had conquered 100 civilizations, began to realize it was facing something it had never encountered before. An enemy that didn't just fight. An enemy that solved problems in real time. An enemy called humanity. The battlefield transformed into a canvas of impossible possibility. Where moments ago the Galactic Confederacy's races had been preparing for extinction, now they watched in stunned silence as humanity rewrote the fundamental rules of engagement. Admiral Corell, the veteran Zarn commander whose 4 cybernetic limbs had seen 100 battles, found himself experiencing something he'd never anticipated: hope. The human communication network spread across the battle zone like a living, breathing organism. It wasn't just about sharing tactical information. It was about teaching an entirely new way of thinking. Confederacy ships that moments ago were operating in rigid, predetermined patterns began to adapt. They learned from the human vessels, not through traditional data transfer, but through a kind of technological osmosis that defied every known principle of interspecies communication. A Krell ferry destroyer, known for its strictly linear combat protocols, suddenly began to move with a fluidity that would have been impossible moments before. Its weapon systems, once predictable and mathematically precise, now danced between targets with an almost organic unpredictability. Their learning, Lieutenant Akira Chen observed from the U.S. Improviser's communication hub. Her fingers danced across quantum entanglement interfaces, weaving a complex tapestry of information that was part communication, part teaching, part pure inspiration. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ship's synopsychological warfare specialist, watched the transformation with scientific fascination. "It's not about the technology," she explained to her colleagues. "It's about perspective. We're not just sharing information. We're sharing a way of thinking." The human approach was less about destruction and more about problem-solving. Each ship became a living learning platform, constantly adapting, constantly evolving. Where alien military doctrines saw conflict as a mathematical equation, humans saw it as a complex, dynamic system waiting to be understood and transformed. Confederacy ships began to communicate in ways they never had before, not through standardized communication protocols, but through a kind of technological improvisation that resembled jazz more than military communication. A void-borne cruiser might suddenly redirect its energy systems based on a split-second suggestion from a human scout ship. A damaged communication array became a collaborative problem-solving tool. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the emerging battle with a mixture of pride and professional curiosity. This was more than a military engagement. This was a fundamental reimagining of collective problem-solving. "We're not just fighting," she muttered to herself. "We're teaching." The ex-Archon watched in growing horror. Their perfectly engineered warrior computers began to experience something they had never been designed to understand: collaborative creativity. The rigid hierarchies that had defined their civilization for millennia began to crack. On the communication channels, something extraordinary happened. Confederacy races that had been bitter enemies for generations began to work together. A Zarn tactical team might suggest a modification to a Kreltheri defensive system. A Voidborn energy specialist would collaborate with a human engineering team to create impossible solutions. It wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a symphony of collective intelligence. Lieutenant Chen's communication arrays began broadcasting something more than tactical information. Fragments of human culture began to bleed into the communication networks. Pieces of music, mathematical sequences, philosophical debates. Each transmission was an invitation to think differently, to see the universe as a problem waiting to be solved rather than a battlefield to be conquered. The ex-Archon began to realize they were facing something far more dangerous than a military threat. They were facing a fundamental challenge to their entire understanding of existence. An enemy that didn't just fight. An enemy that inspired. An enemy that transformed everything it touched. An enemy called humanity. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as Captain Elena Rodriguez orchestrated the final assault. The U.S. Improviser became more than a ship. It was a conductor's baton, directing a symphony of technological rebellion that would redefine galactic warfare. Tactical convergence in 3. Rodriguez called out, her voice a calm center in the maelstrom of combat. 2. 1. The human fleet didn't move like a traditional military formation. They moved like a living, breathing organism, each ship an individual cell capable of independent action, yet perfectly synchronized with the whole. Where the Khazar-Khan extinction blade represented mathematical precision, the human fleet represented something far more dangerous: pure, unadulterated creativity. Chief Engineer Valentina Ortiz worked her technological magic from the engineering deck. Damaged systems weren't problems. They were opportunities. A compromised power relay became a weapon. A fractured communication array transformed into a quantum entanglement signal disruptor. "They're trying to predict our next move," Ortiz muttered, her hands blurring across holographic interfaces. "But we don't have a next move. We have infinite possibilities." The Khazar-Khan battleship began to experience something it had never known: genuine fear. Lieutenant Maria Santos' squadron struck with precision that defied computational logic. They didn't attack the ex-Archon's strongest points. They attacked its fundamental understanding of conflict. Each strike was a surgical intervention, exploiting microscopic vulnerabilities that the alien tactical systems couldn't comprehend. Holographic duplicates danced between energy weapons. Quantum-entangled communication arrays created localized gravitational anomalies that bent space itself. What should have been impossible became reality. "Primary computational matrices failing," reported Lieutenant Jack Miyamoto, tracking the battleship's deteriorating systems. "They're burning out their own tactical networks trying to understand us." The human assault was less about destruction and more about deconstruction. They weren't just fighting the ex-Archon. They were dismantling their entire philosophical approach to conflict. Fragments of human culture bled into the Ex-Archon communication networks. World War II radio transmissions mixed with quantum mathematical sequences. Pieces of classical music intertwined with cognitive dissonance algorithms. Each transmission was a weapon more powerful than any energy cannon. A challenge to the very foundations of alien thought. On the bridge of the U.S. Improviser, Captain Rodriguez watched the extinction blade begin to come apart. Not from brute force, but from 1,000 small, intelligent attacks that exploited every microscopic weakness. "We're not destroying them," she observed quietly. "We're solving the problem of their existence." The battleship's massive energy weapons began to turn inward. Perfectly calibrated systems started to cannibalize themselves, unable to process the fundamental challenge presented by human unpredictability. Computational matrices that had conquered 100 civilizations began to collapse under the weight of pure, unadulterated human creativity. Lieutenant Akira Chen's communication arrays delivered the final blow, not with violence, but with pure information, a cascading series of signal patterns that was part mathematical sequence, part philosophical challenge, part pure inspiration. The extinction blade shuddered, and then it began to die. Not with a massive explosion, not with a dramatic final assault, but with the quiet surrender of a system that had finally encountered a problem it could not solve. Humanity had entered the fight, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after battle was more profound than the conflict itself. As the massive Xarchon Extinction Blade battleship disintegrated into cosmic dust, the human fleet didn't celebrate with traditional military pageantry. Instead, they began immediate rescue operations, pulling surviving ships from the battlefield with a precision and compassion that bewildered the other Galactic Confederacy races. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the U.S. Improviser, her uniform crisp, her demeanor calm. The holographic displays around her showed rescue vectors, medical support protocols, and emergency resource allocation, all being managed with an efficiency that defied the chaos of moments before. "Status of alien survivors?" she asked quietly. Lieutenant Akira Chen's fingers danced across communication interfaces. Preliminary reports show 73.6% survival rate across Confederacy and Xarchon vessels. Medical support algorithms are adapting in real time to multiple physiological requirements. Admiral Kurel, the veteran Zarn commander, watched from a nearby communication console. His 4 cybernetic limbs, which had once represented the pinnacle of military technology, now seemed almost primitive compared to the human approach to crisis management. "You're rescuing them," Kurel stated, more a observation than a question. "Even that Xarchon." Captain Rodriguez turned, her eyes holding a complexity that spoke of something deeper than military strategy. "We're not here to destroy," she responded. "We're here to solve problems. Together." Those words would echo across the galaxy. The rescue operation was more than a military action. It was a statement. Humanity wasn't just entering the galactic stage. They were redefining what it meant to be a spacefaring civilization. Confederacy vessels that moments ago were bitter enemies now worked in collaborative rescue efforts. A Krelthari medical ship would coordinate with a human emergency response team. Voidborne communication specialists would help translate medical requirements across species. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ship's psychological warfare specialist, watched the emerging cooperation with scientific fascination. It was never about the battle, she explained to her colleagues. It was about demonstrating a different approach to existence. Aboard the surviving Xarchon vessels, something unprecedented began to happen. Warriors bred for millennia to be unthinking instruments of destruction started to experience something they'd never known. Genuine curiosity about the beings who had just fundamentally challenged their entire civilization. The human communication networks didn't just transmit tactical information anymore. They became conduits of cultural exchange, of shared understanding. Fragments of human music, philosophical debates, mathematical sequences continued to flow, not as weapons, but as invitations to think differently. Lieutenant Maria Santos coordinated the rescue efforts with the same precision she had applied to combat. Damaged ships were not just repaired, they were reimagined. A compromised life support system became an opportunity for collaborative engineering. "We're not just saving lives," Santos observed. "We're building relationships." As the last of the survivors were rescued, Captain Rodriguez made her final broadcast. It wasn't a military communique. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It was an invitation. "To our fellow beings in the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying a mixture of respect, curiosity, and hope. "We're here. We're ready to help. We're ready to learn." The transmission went out across all frequencies, in multiple languages, with translation algorithms that ensured every nuance was captured. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had not just entered the fight. They had transformed it entirely.